Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 2 of the DIMS show. We're glad to have you here. And in today's episode, I will be talking about the Keke business. It's a business that I did for about 6 months. We'll talk about how I got into the business, lessons learned, terrible mistakes made, and of course, we'll put it under the DIMS microscope to evaluate the business in today's market, and at the end, we're going to give it a DIMS rating. All right, let's make sense of it. Okay, so yeah, let's talk about the Keke business. I started this business sometime in 2019. So that was shortly after I started the POS business. And it was just something that I wanted to be giving me steady money, right? And if you notice the pattern with businesses that I did at the time, I just wanted something that had obvious demand, right? Something that I didn't have to go w- structuring a marketing campaign. I just wanted something that when people saw, they immediately understood what it was about. There was obvious demand. So, for example, with the POS business, you see a store, you see a POS banner, immediately you understand what is going on there. And you just come and do your transaction and go, right? So, similar to the POS business, the Keke business, I wanted something that I could find a very busy route, put a Keke there, and once you see a rider you want to move, you flag the person down, you go your way, you pay my rider, and I get my money, right? So that's exactly what I was going for. And I thought it was a good strategy. So, yeah. So that's what I wanted. And that's why I got into the Keke business. So, I at the time, obviously, the first thing was I needed a keke, and then of course I needed a rider. So at the time, I was working with my family business. We were doing these talking books that were used for education in mostly underprivileged communities. So I was heading production at the time, and I would have to go to Morg Plaza opposite UTC. So I went there at least every week. I was there to do some book binding, lamination, and all of that. So there was this lady that used to do my lamination work for me. So most of the time, she used to give me good rates. So I was working with her a lot of the time, and I had worked with her for about 3 years. So as usual, I had built trust. In my mind, that was enough to build trust with somebody. So I told her that I wanted someone to ride the keke for me, that I was thinking of going into the keke business and all. So I asked her if she could find somebody for me. And she said, okay, fine. She would look around and get back to me. So about 2 or 3 days later, she called me and said, okay, she had somebody that she trusted that would be very good for me. And I said, okay, fine. Of course, my usual pattern of trusting people, as she recommended that person, I just felt, okay, I know you, I've dealt with you for 3 years. You wouldn't give me somebody that would be a bad person. So I just trusted, you know, that the guy she was going to give me was a good person. So I remember the guy's name was Joseph. So let's put that aside. So then to acquiring the keke, so I had gone on Gigi. I had looked around and then I saw, I think brand new kekes at that time were going for about 650, 700,000 naira. And I didn't want to put in that amount of money. So I was looking for a second hand keke, and I had seen this guy that was selling for about 300,000. So we negotiated, she settled on 280. So even the 280 self, I didn't want to put in the full money. So I spoke to my girlfriend at the time. She's my wife now. So I spoke to her and told her, okay, look, this is what I am thinking of doing. Would you want us to go into this business together and all of that? So I explained everything to her and she was like, fine, let's give it a shot. So I brought half of the money, she brought half of the money, explained to her that this is how we are going to make it back. So the agreement with the Joseph guy was simple. 11,000 per week. Of course, so 5 was going to go to my girlfriend slash wife now, and 5,005 was to come to me. So he would handle fueling of the keke. He was to handle servicing. Then, of course, it was still my property. So I was responsible for major damages and fixing and all of that. So I just told him, look, just make sure you don't spoil anything. And I felt that was enough to ensure that the keke would stay in good, perfect working condition. So we had our agreement. So I met with the person that was to sell the keke to me. So it was somewhere in Wuye. We had agreed one day to meet up, and then uh, so I didn't even get a mechanic to check it out to know if any of the shocks or the tires or the struts or any ball joints, anything to know if they were in good condition. My mind was just simply, let's go, turn it on. If it starts one time, can it move forward? Yes. Can it move backward? Yes. Fantastic. That's good. So that was my plan for it. We had done all of that and everything was, we checked it and it was fine. So I felt, okay, we're good to go. And I mean, I was so excited about this because I think at that time, for a Corolla, which I was using at the time, my wife was also using a Corolla. So to fill a Corolla then was around 8,000 naira or thereabout. So it was just a fantastic arrangement because he was to pay 11,000 per week, and that was going to give us money to be able to fuel our cars. And it was just a fantastic arrangement. So I mean, in my mind, we had cracked the, you know, passive income matrix, and that was just the plan. So I called him after I collected it, gave the keke to him. As usual, I didn't even sign anything with this guy. So I called him. He picked up the keke and he was to start off the following day. And as usual, things would always start off well. Everything was going fine. There were no issues. And every Monday he was to make the payment of 11,000. So he did that unfailingly for maybe about 6 weeks, going on 2 months. Then after that, the story started. Today he's not feeling fine. His body is paining him. The next day he tells me, "Oh, this needs fixing, that needs fixing." So sometimes I would even have to send him money, or I would just tell him, "Okay, fix it from the money that you gathered yesterday and the day before, and use that to fix the problem." So because he knew that based on the agreement, I was in charge of fixing anything that spoiled. He was just responsible for servicing and the petrol. So he would use that as an excuse to pay less whenever Monday came. So, and in fact, at times, let's say he would pay instead of the 11,000, it now got to a time where some days I'm even getting 8,000 or 7,000. And obviously, I didn't want to tell my wife that the business was crumbling because I was the one that went and approached her for the money. So whenever the guy paid 7,000, I would just I would just send her 5,005 and just keep 1,500 for myself. And that was the only money I would make that week. So it was just going downhill from there. So but then at the time I didn't have like concrete evidence to say this is what the guy was doing and that he was just telling stories and everything. So one fateful day, there's always just one fateful day that something happens. So he had told me a day before that he was sick and that he took injection that he wouldn't be able to work for the next 2 days. And I was like, okay, fine, no problem. Then it happened that I was going to Morg Plaza to do some work the following day. So that was the first day of his day off to recover and everything. So when I got to Morg Plaza, I had called him. I wanted to speak to him about something or just to check in on him or something. I can't remember. So I had called him and he didn't he didn't respond. He didn't pick up. Then he didn't know that I was going to meet the lady that referred me to him. So because I had called him around 8 in the morning, so this was around maybe 1 in the afternoon or something. So I was at More Plaza. So I met the lady and I was like, okay, can you call Joseph for me? And then she calls him and I asked her to put it on speaker. Lo and behold, he answered and I could hear the busy hustling and bustling in the background. And it was like, I beg, call me later, or I day road, I beg, call me later. So his voice was well and strong. He was riding the keke, doing work, making money for himself, and had given me this story so that he wouldn't have to pay any money. Now, in the midst of all this, guess what I did? I went and purchased another keke. Like, as if all that I was going through was not bad enough. I went and purchased another keke. So someone had told me of this Mr. Adamu that was in charge of, like, he had a company and he was in charge of like 80 to 100 kekes. He had people riding for him or just people who owned kekes that brought their kekes to him to manage. So I called the guy and spoke to him, and he said that what they would give me is 9,000 per week. So that was the agreement. So I was looking at it, I was like, okay, this other one was 11,000. Not like I was even getting the 11,000. So it was supposed to be 9,000 per week, and they would get a rider for you, just bring the keke. So I contacted the guy that sold me the first one. This was a slightly older model, so instead of 280, I think I paid like 250 or something. So I brought it, you know, gave it to the Mr. Damo guy. So I wanted to sign an agreement with him. So he was just like, "Do you know? Do you know how many keke where they manage? Which one be this agreement? See, this one, your own, only one. I get people where they give me 10 keke, 15. So made it just look like yours is nothing serious. So what's the point of signing an agreement? An agreement is only for someone that is doing so many at a time. So I just agreed and gave it to him. No agreement signed. Just blind trust. Like, I don't even get why I used to do that. But anyway, That's what I did. Now, after giving this guy the keke, I did not get one, like not even one single payment from these guys. Not even one. And every time I would call this guy, call him, he wouldn't pick. So at a point, I thought the keke was gone. So one day, I just called him. He answered and agreed to meet me somewhere in Wuse. Then the guy that was riding the keke. So in fact, there was somebody riding it because the day that I went to meet him, he told me. So I had to wait for like 45 minutes for the person riding it to bring it back. So he had been using it and making money from it and just decided, I'm not going to give this guy any money. Like, we didn't sign any agreement. So he basically just gave me this keke for free. In fact, I'm just glad that I didn't lose the keke entirely. So I just collected it back, collected the one that was with this Joseph guy, sold everything, sold both of them, tried to recover some money back, and just exited the business. So I just saw that, look, this thing, it just, maybe it just wasn't for me, or I hadn't understood that. I think the main lesson I got to understand was that this wasn't just something that was for passive income. It's something that you have to be fully involved with. So, anyway, that's the story of how I got into the keke business and how I got out of the keke business. So, next up, we're going to be looking at the DIMS lenses. We'll look at demand, investment, monetization, and sustainability, then talk about a bit of risk before we give the final DIMS rating. Welcome back. So, next, we're going to answer the question: does it make sense to get into the keke business in Nigeria today? Not in theory, not in some futuristic clean energy fantasy where all the amenities exist. Today, in Nigeria's actual transport economy. Now, for those who do not know, a keke is a tricycle that is used for transportation, similar to the tuk-tuk or rickshaw in other countries. So, if you want to enter the keke business right now and you are buying a brand new keke, should you go for a petrol powered keke, or B, a battery powered or EV keke? So we are going to be using a TVS King and the Corey Tick from Corey Mobility as case studies. Now, I know that there are CNG powered kekes, but we will leave that out for the purpose of this discussion. So we'll just compare the two listed. Then at the end, we are going to run the keke business through the DIMS framework: demand, investment, monetization, and sustainability. And yes, we'll give each section a brutal but fair DIMS rating to answer the question: does it make sense? So, without further ado, let's make sense of it. So, first, we're going to be looking at demand. This business has a massive advantage. People need to move. It's as simple as that. People need to move. And in cities across Nigeria, Abuja, Lagos, Port Harcourt, Kano, Jos, the entire country, kekes have become deeply embedded in transportation. They solve very real problems. So things like short distance transportation, first and last mile commuting, routes that buses can't access, and they are cheaper alternatives to ride hailing apps. So even with transport fares rising, demand hasn't disappeared. And no matter how much people complain, they still need transportation. And this applies to both keke, petrol kekes, and EV kekes. If I recall correctly, we see instances where companies like Bolt make use of kekes on their apps for transportation and delivery. So demand is very strong. So we're going to give demand a DIMS rating of 9 over 10. So I'm tweaking the rating model. So instead of giving ratings over 2.5, we're going to give each rating over 10, and then we'll find the average at the end. Now let's move to investment. Investment. Now, this is where people get surprised. Now, a petrol keke, like we said, the TVS King, for example, costs roughly 4.3 to 4.7 million. Some sell 5 million, but let's just use an average of 4.5 million. So, as you can see, kekes are no longer cheap like before, where you could get a brand new one for like 700,000 naira. It's different now. So, let's now look at the electric keke. A brand new Tick costs roughly 3.8 million naira, as is written on their site, right? Which shocks many people because EVs are just assumed to be more expensive. But that's not the case here. In fact, in a lot of cases, EVs are cheaper than similarly spec'd counterpart vehicles, whether kekes or cars, you know. So we have a lot of EVs that are cheaper than regular petrol cars with very similar specs. Okay. So for this case study, the EV keke is cheaper. Now let's remember that there are some hidden capital expenses beyond the purchasing of the keke. So things like permits, registrations, even if you're doing like fleet management now, you're going to talk about how you're going to manage all the kekes under your fleet, things like repairs, maintenance, emergencies. So you have to consider all of that. And then, of course, for EVs, you have to look at things like battery infrastructure, battery swap partnerships, and things like that. So, but all in all, we'll give investment a DIMS rating of 7.5. It's accessible compared to purchasing like a vehicle or a bus, but it's no longer small money that people used to think. So we'll give it a 7.5 over 10 rating. Let's talk about monetization. Now we ask the real question: how exactly do you make money? Now, there are several models that one can adopt with a keke business. So we're going to look at, let's say, four of them. Model one, an owner operator model. So you buy the keke and drive it yourself, or you hire someone as a staff to drive it for you. So for daily revenue, we're looking at 15 to 30,000, sometimes even more on very busy routes. Now, of course, you also have to factor in things like daily petrol costs, salary for your driver if you get a driver, union dues, levies, repairs. There are other miscellaneous expenses. So your potential take home would be in the range of 7 to 15,000 daily, right? Now for EV kekes, you're looking at something a bit different. It's slightly different. Now, when you look at the demographic of a typical keke rider, you honestly don't expect them to have charging stations at home. So their options are either they go to a location that offers battery charging, but then they're going to have to sit and wait for it to charge for like 45 minutes to 1 hour, or even more, depending on the amount of people that are charging at any given time. Or alternatively, a better solution would be what some companies are doing, which is having battery swap stations. So it's simply a technician swapping out the battery that's already charged in about 5 minutes. They say it takes like 3 minutes on some websites, but let's say 5 minutes. So, looking at battery swaps, the estimated charge for like battery swaps, like what Core Mobility says on their site, is about 5,000 per swap. So, meaning that depending on the amount of distance covered, you're going to do two swaps a day, maybe even three swaps a day. And that would cost you, say, 10,000 to 15,000 every day. And as for maintenance, it's likely that the EV Keke will be cheaper long term. So that's the owner operator model. Then for model two, we'll look at fleet ownership. You own multiple kekes, drivers remit daily. So, for example, you're looking at 8,000 to 12,000 daily per keke. So, let's say you have 10 kekes at an average of 10,000 naira daily. You're looking at 100,000 naira daily gross inflow. It sounds amazing, but just wait until reality shows up. So, but we'll table that for now. Now, for model 3, we'll talk about the hire purchase model. Now, this is a very common model where you allow drivers eventually own the keke after structured payments. So, let's say a keke that costs 4.5 million, you can charge an upfront fee and then charge a certain amount daily, weekly, or monthly. So let's say you charge 12,000 naira daily, or 70,000 weekly, or 300,000 monthly. It's your choice to be more aggressive or less aggressive. And of course, that all depends on things like your market, competition, risks, and just basically how fast you want to recover your capital. So this model can be highly profitable, but then it's also very chaotic. I won't lie to you, it is chaotic. Let's move on to model 4. Now, this is what I would call the managed fleet or passive ownership model. This is where things get interesting. So, certain companies like the Enviable Group, if you've heard of them, offer models where you buy the keke, they manage the drivers, handle operations, and then you receive scheduled payouts. So, usually weekly, monthly. I hear some people even say, just pay me a lump sum at the end of the year. So, this is attractive for people who want exposure to the business but don't want to chase drivers, don't want operational headache. They already have a primary source of income or business that they are doing. Okay. So now your upside may be lower than fully self managing a successful fleet for years, but your stress level will be dramatically lower. And that trade off matters, especially in a country like Nigeria. So let me give a disclaimer. This is not a personal endorsement. I haven't tried it before, but you should still do your own due diligence. This is just a model that is important and is out there, and it changes the conversation from must I become a transport manager to can this become an investment asset class? And that is a very different discussion. So, to our DIMS monetization rating, we're going to give it an 8 over 10, right? Money can be made, but this is far from passive income unless somebody else is handling the chaos for you, right? So, we'll just give it an 8 over 10 rating. Now, before we discuss sustainability, let's look at a few things. The first thing that we're going to look at is the operating cost war. Now, this is where petrol versus EV gets interesting. So let's start with petrol. So 1 liter or on in a TVS King can take you like 28 kilometers. and it has a fuel capacity of about 15 liters. And then on average, it costs about 1,360 for a liter of fuel in Nigeria right now. So when you compute that, a petrol keke comes to about 48.6 naira per kilometer. Okay. Now, for the EV keke, one full charge can give you about 90 kilometers of range. So at 5,000 naira per battery swap, you're looking at about 55.6 naira per kilometer. Okay. So you can see that petrol, petrol is slightly cheaper, but I would say is barely cheaper. And just one major petrol increase and the tables will just flip. I mean, not long ago, petrol was about 800 naira per liter, and now it's about 1,360. So that is definitely something to keep an eye on. Now let's look at maintenance. With a petrol keke, you're dealing with things like engine repairs, oil changes, overheating, transmission issues, and so on. An EV keke, more likely than not, will have fewer breakdown points because it has less moving parts. But you will deal with things like battery degradation from constant use. And it also means that at a certain point, riders will start complaining and saying, this battery could last a certain number of trips. It's not doing that again. And if you're doing a battery swapping model, it now raises the question, who is responsible to change the batteries that have degraded and become weak? And it's a huge expense. So this is a major question that needs to be answered. And you can also argue that there aren't enough specialized technicians. Yeah, there are auto technicians, but this is something different. And then you have issues where anything can cause the battery management system to malfunction. So if the keke experiences power loss when driving, the question is, are there people that can sort this out? You know, and like we mentioned, swap stations are still a major challenge. Okay. So, but let me mention something, right? A lot of people will say, okay, there are petrol stations everywhere, and they will argue and say, what happens if you get to a place where you cannot charge the battery or swap? Now, here's the deal: 99% of keke riders have a route that they operate to and fro. So, if you look at a place like Guarimpa, most riders operating on 6th Avenue axis down to Kasana just fill up at Asman filling station. That's the only filling station within the area, except they go all the way down to Third Avenue, which is some distance away. So the point here is that there doesn't have to be swap stations all over the country. Just major areas where there's a huge concentration of keke. So this is a huge business opportunity for anyone who desires to go into it. Just saying. Okay. Now, let's touch on risk briefly. This business has very real risks. The major risk, the major risk, government policy risk. This is huge. A state can just suddenly restrict a keke route. In fact, Lagos and Abuja have shown how brutal this can be. So, one policy decision can just totally destroy revenue. Another risk, accident risk. I mean, this is transportation. Accidents happen and they can wipe out profit. One terrible accident, and you're not talking about cost of fixing, you're talking about the entire investment in that keke being gone. So there's accident risk. Now we also have driver risk. And then for those handling fleets, this is something that you handle on a larger scale. So you're looking at things like theft, you're looking at things like poor maintenance from the riders. So instead of servicing maybe every week or every 2 weeks, they are thinking of how to service maybe every month or to stretch it as long as possible, depending on the nature of the keke that you're using. You also look at a rider just disappearing. I mean, a rider can just decide to stop coming, you know. You have instances where a rider drops off the keke at a certain location. So let's say you have maybe your house or a secured location. If people are using it and the rider has to drop it off every day, the next day the rider just makes up their mind that they want to do something else. They won't call you, they won't talk to you, they won't give you any explanation. They'll just go and stop coming. Now, even if you've done your due diligence, they know that they've returned the keke, they feel like they don't owe you anything, and they just decide they are not going to come anymore. And they know that it's not worth it for you to go to the police or anything. So there is that risk. And then there's non-remittance. The person is doing work, making money, and the person just decides, I'm not going to remit money anymore. And it becomes a fight and a tussle, you know. And then, of course, the risk of infrastructure when it comes to EVs. These swap stations are just not readily available. Lastly, let's also talk about counterparty risk. So this is where in fleet managed systems, you have another company managing it for you. So if another company is managing it for you, your returns depend on them surviving, depends on them paying consistently, managing the drivers properly, maintaining the fleet responsibly, you know. So while managed operations or managed ownerships reduces stress, it introduces a massive trust risk. Right. That was a lot. So finally, we'll look at S, sustainability. Now, this is where everything comes together, right? Let's put it this way. Today, petrol wins convenience. I would say EV wins future potential. Now, you ask, why could EVs take off later? As renewable energy becomes more accessible, we're going to have situations where solar charging hubs become more available, battery swap stations will be more, and swaps will be cheaper. And of course, battery technology will get better. And then EV infrastructure businesses will also boom. And as I mentioned before, this could become a massive business opportunity for a lot of people who have the funds to do it. So there's a chance someone decides to build someone Nigeria's version of fuel stations for electricity mobility, and then the person has so many stations in different states across the country. It's a huge business opportunity, and as battery technology improves, we're going to have better range. We're going to have faster charging and lower cost. You know, so EVs could become significantly more profitable down the line. So who wins today? For an individual operator, I would say petrol feels safer. For someone who is managing a fleet, EVs get quite interesting, you know. Then for a passive investor, a managed fleet model becomes very, very attractive, especially for people who want transportation exposure without becoming like full-time transport managers. Then for infrastructure investors, there is massive long-term opportunity. So, all in all, we're going to give sustainability a DIMS rating of 7 over 10 today. I mean, it could become 9 over 10 in future, but for today, we'll give it 7 over 10. So that brings us to our final DIMS score. Demand 9 over 10, investment 7.5 over 10, monetization 8 over 10, and sustainability 7 over 10. So that gives us an overall score of 7.9 over 10. So, what's the final verdict? Does the keke business make sense? I would say for petrol keke, yes. For an operator who wants reliability today, it makes sense. For the EV keke, yes, but not fully yet. But it's a gap that is closing day by day. And it may quietly become one of Nigeria's biggest transportation shifts over the next decade. So I'll leave you with this. Yes, Nigerians are slowly adopting EV cars, but EV tricycles, that could be our first true mass market EV success story, because this market doesn't care about saving the planet as such. It just cares about one thing: who goes home with more money at the end of the day. So that brings us to the end of this episode of the DIMS show. And as always, if you have any business idea that you're unsure about, or you just want a second opinion, send it to hello@thedimshow.com and we'll make sense of it. Thank you for watching and see you on the next episode. Cheers.